It is November 7th, 2024. And if there's anything that Trump was outspoken about on the campaign trail, it was this promise that if he was elected, he would end the war in Ukraine. He said he could do it in 24 hours. He said he would even do it as president elect. Now, as has been explained to me by plenty of people on social media, not everyone expects him to keep his campaign promises, but I do think it's important that we hold this man accountable for what he said when he was campaigning for office. So, what do we know about what a second term of the Trump administration would do, what plans they would present in a possible deal between Russia and Ukraine? Well, so far, based on the anonymous insiders that are being quoted in Western media, it's not looking good for the Trump administration. I'll say that much. Because based on some of those reported plans, they are approaching this as if Russia is currently losing this conflict, as if Kiev is winning, and they're just trying to offer a little bit of a bone to Moscow to say, you know what, we'll put off NATO membership for Ukraine for, up to 20 years, or we'll freeze the conflict at the current lines. But they're not taking into account the reality of the situation, the fact that not only is Russia not losing right now, but they are well aware of what happens when the conflict is frozen. They're well aware of the fact that the West uses any time they can get to rearm Kiev and to rebuild up their military for a future conflict with Russia. And for Russia, that is the last thing that they want right now. They want this to be settled for once and for all, and they know that that is not going to happen overnight. So where do things stand, and where could we go from here? We got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as we all know that we've survived the 2024 US presidential election. Donald Trump has won, and according to exactly, I'm sure everyone's feeling that way to a certain extent. Now, according to Trump's campaign promises, he's going to end the war in Ukraine as president-elect even, and he's going to do it in 24 hours. Now, I'm not that optimistic, but hey, there are some reports citing anonymous insiders going around, like this one from the Wall Street Journal, which states that Trump's team is coming up with plans to freeze the conflict along current lines. And at least one of them includes a 20-year pledge for Kiev not to join NATO, but it would allow Washington to arm Kiev and build up its military still. How do you view the current talk that is going around?
American political discourse seems to think that Trump is either Hitler or Gandhi, and he's either going to destroy the world or there's going to be a kumbaya moment, and we're all going to live in peace and harmony ever after. I'm just amazed at the lack of rationality in U.S. political discourse regarding, Trump or pretty much anything else. And I think a lot of perhaps well-meaning Trump supporters have some extremely unrealistic expectations of the man, what he can do with this conflict, what he can do with the powers, of the executive branch, how much power he actually has to control foreign and military policy. And all of that should keep in context what happened the last time he was president and how he failed to do so many of the things that he proclaimed he was going to do, peace with, North Korea, withdrawing U.S. troops from Syria, withdrawing U.S. troops from Afghanistan, improving relations with Russia. All of those things failed, right? He failed to do all of those things, every one of them. U.S. relations with Russia under his administration became the absolute worst that they had been up until that time. Hundreds of rounds of sanctions that his administration levied against Russia. And according to him, he is the one who started arming the Kiev regime, not with lethal weapons, not Biden. So take that with a grain of salt. He has also claimed that in a discussion with Putin, he told Putin that he would bomb downtown Moscow. And he has also said that if Putin doesn't agree to his deal to end the conflict in Ukraine, that he will flood Ukraine with weapons. Weapons, of course, that the United States doesn't have, because if it had them, the Biden administration would have already flooded them with them. Right? They're going on monthly production at this point, drawing from monthly production, and the Pentagon stocks are empty. So I certainly don't believe. I mean, whenever you want to start that 24-hour clock, feel free. But the conflict in Ukraine is not going to end. Here's the truth of the matter: is that neither Ukraine nor Russia nor anyone outside the closest of Trump's adherents in his president-elect team in the United States want to end the conflict in Ukraine. Certainly not as things are stand now. The conflict is not done, right? The Kiev regime is not beaten. NATO has not been defeated, and of course, neither has Russia. It's actually winning. So, first of all, now Zelensky has turned on a dime, and his buttering up of Trump in the last 24 hours on Twitter, would make any baker blush. Complete reversal of calling JD Vance a radical and all the things that we heard before, as Zelensky was essentially on the stump with U.S. Democratic candidates at an artillery factory in Pennsylvania, in Scranton, Pennsylvania, actually my hometown. Wilkes-Barre, Scranton. It's not going to happen, right? Let's get it. Certainly not in 24 hours, and almost certainly not before he begins the administration in January, and almost likely not for any considerable time after that. People have a lot of unrealistic expectations that he's just going to suddenly end all aid to Ukraine. He's just going to hand Ukraine to Putin as the U.S. president, and that's going to be it. That is not what is going to happen. We need to have a dose of realism here. I mean, I understand the sentiment. A lot of people are glad the liberals got their comeuppance and Trump is back in office. But let's be rational now here for a moment. If we take a look at the plans that, according to the Financial Times, the Trump administration or presumptive Trump administration officials are floating around, calling for essentially a ceasefire, a freeze of the conflict along the current lines, and a 20-year promise. like the U.S. doesn't hand out promises like door prizes, right? And that Ukraine will not enter NATO for 20 years, but we'll keep arming it all the time. Okay, none of that is acceptable to Russia, right? Anything that Trump can offer will not be accepted by Russia. There's no package or deal that Trump, as the president of the United States, is capable of offering Russia, realistically, that Russia would accept. Russia is winning on the battlefield. They don't want a ceasefire. They've been quite clear about this. They're going to end this conflict, right? The West is never going to recognize that the Donbass, that Kherson and Zaporozhye and Crimea are part of Russia. They're never going to agree on principle that Ukraine can never join NATO. They are never going to stop arming Kiev, right? Again, all these expectations that Trump is going to just turn off the spigot to Kiev is decried by his own closest people, speaking to the newspapers, saying that they intend to keep arming Ukraine until, well, the cows come home. So this is, completely unrealistic. And it has to be said that the Kiev regime does not want peace on American terms either. They don't want any compromise. They've been fed a line of hopium and copium by the Biden administration for the last few years. And they, it's still a propaganda line of his regime, the 1991 borders, right? And Russia paying war reparations and war crimes tribunals and pretty little pink ponies for Zelensky. So this is neither side, and we have to, outside of the Trump-owned administration, but there is broad bipartisan consensus for continuing the flow of arms and funds to Kiev. So I think it is likely, I think it's almost certainly that we'll see a decrease in the flow of arms simply because the U.S. is running out of weapons that it can provide that the Kiev regime that are still useful to it. And it is likely that there will be some symbolic show to reduce the flow of arms and financial aid to the Kiev regime from a Trump-controlled Congress, with the expectation that Europe will pick up the shortfall, which that is exactly what European leaders are now loudly proclaiming. We'll see if they are actually capable of following through on it, that they intend to not only continue aid, military and financial, to the Kiev regime, but increase it. At the same time, the German government just collapsed. So that also has to be taken with a degree of salt. We don't know where all the pieces are going to fall and align in the coming days until January. But remember, first of all, whatever Trump may have said on the campaign, that was campaign rhetoric. His powers are limited. The reality of the situation is a world order shaping geopolitical conflict, and Trump does not and will not have the ability to just hand Ukraine to Russia and essentially not present terms or any type of deal that would in any way be acceptable to the Kremlin, or to Kiev for that matter, that meet Russia's own declared goals of the special military operation.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because I know that the U.S. loves to act as though the, conflict in Ukraine, that it just magically started on February 24th, 2022, right? There was no conflict before then. It started that day, or the Israelis started targeting the Palestinians after October 7th of last year, right? Never any context there. And then they act as though, we'll just bring Russia some variation of like the Minsk agreement, like 3.0 on this end, saying we'll freeze the conflict. We'll promise that they're not going to join NATO for a couple of decades, but then we'll keep arming them. It's like Russia wasn't born yesterday, right? Yeah. Anytime you listen to a speech from Vladimir Putin, he is laying out the context over the course of decades of how we got to this point and making it very clear that he's not going to just accept some deal because Trump is in office for 4 years. And I guess there's some hope that maybe
4 years. Like, what does that mean? Right? Like, he'll be gone in 4 years. And is Ukraine going to go away after that time? Like, the Russian government, I mean, whatever Trump may promise, he doesn't even have the ability to keep in the long term anyway. And Russian government certainly has to keep the long term, much less the short term. Let's forget that. And who was it that Trump brought in to run his foreign policy the last time around?
You had Mike
Pompeo and John Bolton. And who are the people now being touted, right, by the, Trump's president-elect team for running his government? Who are they talking about for Secretary of Defense? Oh, Mike Pompeo. And who are they talking about for Secretary of State? Oh, Mark Rubio. I mean, it's a neocon jamboree. They lose and they still win. It's absolutely amazing. The neocons are just, the living dead. They literally
really are. They never go away. And yeah, you've got Trump being like, look, I've got RFK Jr., I've got Tulsi Gabbard. It's like,
okay, yeah, well, RFK Jr. is going to be in charge of something to do with health policy, not foreign policy. And Tulsi Gabbard will be lucky if she gets an attaboy and a slap pat on the back. Let's be honest about that.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's the thing that Americans always seem to forget about, right? When they go to the polls, when they vote in the most important election in our history, they ignore the fact that, hey, Trump, you look at his first cabinet, it's probably going to have a lot of similarities to his second cabinet, even if he doesn't include John Bolton or Elliot Abrams or some of those neocons. Well, there's still plenty of swamp creatures to go around, and he still has not drained that swamp. But I do want to ask you about the latest coming out of Russia's Kursk region, as I know that Kiev has obviously launched this months-long incursion, and now anonymous U.S. officials are joining Zelensky's claims that Kiev's forces are actively fighting North Korean troops among the Russians. And I know that we talked last week about the logistics that would be required for this kind of involvement, but what do you make of the fact that the West is suddenly pushing this story so hard when Kiev is not faring well in the incursion that they launched into Russia?
Okay, so first of all, it must be said, I'm getting a whole lot of, both Red Dawn and I see Asian people vibes, right? Forgetting, of course, that Russia has, a significant amount of ethnicities in its 200 plus ethnicities that look Asian. They don't look anything like North Koreans, but, as far as Americans are concerned, I guess anyone who's not a immediate white European Slavic looking Russian is a North Korean now. That's certainly what the Kiev regime is counting on. Like anonymous officials say something, right? Let's stop right there. If North Korean troops were really already involved in this conflict, do you think that the United States and Europe would just be, oh, they're attacking, right? North Korean troops are involved. So will you increase Zelensky? Will you conduct long range strikes into Russia? No, we still won't do that. Will NATO come to our rescue and send troops? No, we're not going to do that. This is ridiculous, right? I'm sorry. Until I see some actual evidence, and I'm not talking about killed Russian Buryat soldiers, right? Or Chukchi or something like this. There's no satellite evidence. There's not even any manufactured communication evidence. This is all what the Zelensky regime says in the hopes of getting all of these things from NATO, that NATO is still not getting them, and they're extremely frustrated by that. They're like, come on, we manufactured this whole story about tens of thousands of North Korean troops, and you still won't give us what we want? And so, the West goes along, well, we can't admit they're lying. So yeah, there's North Koreans, tens of thousands of them. They're storming Kiev. No, we still won't give you anything on that list. It's all if North Korean troops suddenly get involved in Kursk tomorrow and there's irrefutable evidence, I won't really care because that's Russian territory anyway. And North Korea is now a Russian treaty ally. But again, there's so many problems and hurdles from the diplomatic problems that it would cause Russia with its other BRICS allies like Brazil and India and the global south, to the complete lack at the moment of any military interoperability between Russian and North Korean troops, because they haven't been doing drills together since well before the fall of the Soviet Union. To the language difficulties. Yes, Russians can learn Korean, and Koreans can learn Russian, but how many of them are there right now in the military that have those abilities? This is just completely unrealistic, right? It's like, snap, tens of thousands of North Korean troops. It's not the way it works with NATO, which has had decades and decades of military interoperability and dealing with the language issues. And I mean, the last time I was involved in NATO missions, it was 20 some years ago, but wow, they were rough. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It was kind of a cluster F, if you know what I'm talking about, with the language issues. And it's why Russia and China are doing joint military drills almost every other month now for several years to build that interoperability that would make capable joint operations. So I still don't believe any of this story until presented with some real evidence. Otherwise, no matter what the Kiev regime says, and no matter how many anonymous Pentagon officials say, yeah, they're there, you just can't see them, and we don't have any evidence, but trust us.
Right, exactly. They're like, yeah, and the part that you were mentioning there too, where it's like, yeah, you have these anonymous US officials saying, sure, you're right about these North Korean troops, but we're not changing anything on our end when it comes to
And
our
we're certainly not
policy.
going on record to put our actual names
Exactly.
to this.
You know the guys that are like, all right, fine, I'll be the guy to say that there are North Koreans in Russia's Kursk region. All right, whatever. Well, speaking of what is going on the actual battlefield, I know that some in the Western media are admitting that things aren't going well for Kiev, not necessarily a new development, but they're also, well, not openly admitting it, but they can't exactly blame North Korea for how things are going in the Donbass region. You've got France 24 writing, Ukrainian defenses in the Donbass risk getting steamrolled by Russian advance. So there's all this talk of Russian advances. So what is the situation on the battlefield, and how close are Russian forces getting to the key Ukrainian stronghold of Pokrovsk?
Okay, we're making progress, but France 24, the Kiev regime forces don't risk being steamrolled. They are being steamrolled, right? It's been going on for weeks now, and it's continuing, right? Sleboda has been taken, right? That's one of the three big behind the line logistics centers that we've been talking about now. There's street fighting in Kharkov, and they're already in an operational encirclement and facing a physical encirclement as well that could become the next big cauldron. And then Russian forces are simultaneously already beginning the encirclement of Pokrovsk, right? At some areas, they're less than 10 kilometers from the city at this point. And it's not like they're going to storm right in. They'll do the same thing they have with these other smaller places, right? Important as well. But they will take any strategic sites like coal mines or slag heaps or fortified positions on hills, right? They will begin to choke off the supply lines, right? They will do all that is necessary to take Pokrovsk while suffering minimal casualties on their side. It's a well-established dance at this point. And Pokrovsk, it must be said, yes, they've hurriedly began the building of defenses supposedly, but they don't have these well built up fortifications that the Kiev regime built up in nearly a decade, like they did in Avdiivka or Toretsk or these other places. And Pokrovsk is already looking surrounded. Everything to the south of them has been taken, or in the case of Kharkov, is being taken right at this moment. Right? I've seen some crazy Western comments, like Pokrovsk is still holding. It hasn't been taken yet. Like they haven't even tried to storm it yet, right? And they're just setting the battlefield. It's absolute. Do you notice all of this to the south that has been taken from Ugledar all the way, on up now to Kharkov? They're completely incapable still of admitting the reality of the situation on the ground. But yes, it is extremely bad for the Kiev regime forces. They're in the Pokrovsk area, they really don't even seem to be able to slow Russian forces down. There are other places, to the very north of the Donbass region. There's also very heavy fighting, although on a smaller scale, going on for the town of Seversk, right? The northernmost remaining fortification of the Kiev regime in the Donbass region. And there the Kiev regime is putting up a credible fight. right? It's a more defendable position, and they're making it a real struggle. That's not what we're seeing in the South. We are still seeing an operational crisis across the board and crumbling Kiev regime defenses. And all of the recently conscripted territorial defense units that they keep trying to plug holes in the lines with aren't doing anything, because those people do not want to fight and die for this regime by and large, and they run given the first opportunity to do so. So it is entirely possible Pokrovsk will probably start to be seriously invested in November and early December. And it is entirely possible by March of next year that Russia will have taken Pokrovsk, despite what will doubtless be the Kiev regime's best attempts to hold on to it. But the most important thing that needs to be said is that I think that Pokrovsk's role, right? It is a important logistics center for the rest of the Kiev regime's forces in the Donbass region, because of it's a meeting place of roads and railroads, big transportation center. That's why it's so important. But because Russian forces are already so close and already have such tight artillery and drone control over the area, that it has essentially, for all intents and purposes, already ceased to act as an effective logistics center for the rest of the Kiev regime's forces in the Donbass. And as that's true, the rest of it is really just reading the writing on the wall.
Yeah, and I think that that's good to keep in mind as well when it comes to the latest reports that we're getting, of course, what the Western media is admitting. Now, the last thing I wanted to ask you about kind of deals with where we stand right now with Western support for Kiev, because we know that obviously Trump is coming in, sure, but he's not inaugurated until January 20th of 2025. So in the meantime, you have Politico reporting that the Biden administration is working overtime to allocate the remaining aid from that $61 billion package that was passed for Ukraine back in April. Now that boils down to about 4.3 billion to pull from existing stocks and 2.1 billion in funding for future weapons contracts with US defense companies, because like you were saying earlier, that's where we're at right now. But it doesn't seem like there's much more the US can or is doing. And you also had, I thought notably, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock went to Kiev on Monday and bragged about Berlin's rock solid support, but she didn't really offer any concrete assurances. So where does that leave Kiev, especially over the next 2 months?
Yeah, okay, well, let's start with Baerbock, because we can dismiss that propaganda show immediately. Rock solid support. Well, that rock solid German support just crumbled because the German government just collapsed. So, just saying. Now, there's very little possibility, even after snap elections, the most likely result will still be some type of SPD, CDU grand alliance to keep the Alternative for Germany out of power. Right, that will almost certainly be the result, which is not going to substantially change the amount of political will within Berlin to support Ukraine. But it has to be kept in mind why this government collapsed is because they can't agree on any solution to the budget woes that the German government has of the hemorrhaging, deindustrializing German economy. So Berlin will still have the political will to support Ukraine. The question is, will they have the economic power to do so? And that's seriously in question. With regards to the Biden administration, now, the last aid package that came out last week did include 211 Stryker military vehicles, right? Armored fighting vehicles, which is not insubstantial, right? That could be part of an effort, if it is combined with other things, to build potentially, it's the same type of shipments that we saw prior to the failed Kiev regime's 2023 offensive in the south. Large numbers of mechanized vehicles, armored fighting vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, APCs. We're likely to see more of this in the coming months, because if there's one thing that the Pentagon does have in abundance still in its stocks, is mechanized vehicles, Bradleys, Strykers, even, Hummers, whatever. That's something they can supply to the Kiev regime on short notice like this, right? The Pentagon can go deeper into its stocks on those, because it's not what they're going to need for a war with China, which is what they're always thinking about. So, but mechanized forces alone are not going to win or change the battlefield calculus. They'll just, raise costs and make it take longer. Again, a part of what Biden is going to be able to do is to sign long-range contracts with the U.S. military-industrial complex, and a certain percentage of monthly production will get siphoned off for the Kiev regime, probably well into the Trump administration. And I don't actually expect the Trump administration to stop those things, although it might have the power to do so. But they will need some symbolic show of stopping some type of aid in order to toss a bone to their own base. Again, we'll have to see as the Trump administration's foreign and military policy team takes shape what they will do and what they won't do. But the rumors we're hearing about possible neocon picks right now are not giving me a warm fuzzy. But, then again, I didn't have any different expectations for the Trump administration 2.0 to begin with. So that's hardly a surprise here.
Yeah, any talk about putting Marco Rubio or Mike Pompeo in your cabinet, even if it's just those, quote unquote anonymous insiders throwing it out there to kind of read the room a little bit. I'm going, if Trump is considering any of them, or Nikki Haley or anyone else that falls into that category, then well, we can't expect any changes from his first administration if he won't change the people within his cabinet. Let's at least say that much. Certainly a lot at stake here all around, and a lot to continue to keep an eye on. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. International relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda, thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for having me. And Trump fanboys, take it easy in the comments. Take it easy. Take a chill pill.
Yes, please. Thank you. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you can find new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also find Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/RachelBlevins. That's where you can participate in regular polls and Q&As and join the community there. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.